Alright, welcome back to the sugar sculpting demo. The interesting thing with this is it's actually directly related to our pastry artist certificate. Our pastry artist certificate actually consists of 4 classes: edible showpiece and design, cake decorating, cake baking, and advanced baking. And if you take our edible showpiece design class, you'll actually be making a sugar sculpture in that class. Sugar sculpting gets kind of technical, but the recipe is pretty simple. All it is sugar, water, corn syrup, and some sort of an acid. Here we're using citric acid for this recipe. You're going to need basically a torch to assemble a showpiece, and you'll need either a sternal or a tea light, something that you can use as far as a smaller flame to stick your parts together. One of the most important things is to make sure your sugar is cooked up to temperature, and to make sure your sugar is at room temperature when you start. If it's cold, it's going to break when you hit it with the heat. So what I'm going to do is, when I'm starting, I'm going to take my pieces that I'm gluing together, and I'm actually going to lay them out before I put any heat on them. If I take and heat these up and then put it on here and it's not where I want it, too late, it's stuck there. If I try to take it off, it's going to break. So I always want to make sure that I'm lining up my pieces. And once I get the base put together, I'm actually going to move it on. I got a turntable here so I can rotate it for you guys. But I make sure I have a sill pad down so that I'm not heating up my counter. But it's going to get noisy. I'm going to heat up my pieces. Oh, yep, it's hot. So what I'm doing here is I'm actually heating it until it looks like it's liquid. And right in here I can see where it floods out just a little bit. If I don't see it where it's flooding out, then I know that it's not adhered correctly and it's going to be a weak joint to it. I just want to hold it for about 5-10 seconds to make sure everything stays up, and I'm going to keep an eye on it as I go to make sure it doesn't start leaning. Because if this straight up and down and I build straight up, it's going to be a nice solid. If I've got everything sideways, that's center of gravity. Same thing if you're on a ladder, you don't want to be reaching way over to the side. It's the same thing with this. You want to make sure that all your pieces are straight up and down. So you want that center of gravity level. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take, this is going to be my top piece, and I'm actually going to take it, make sure that all my pieces are going to fit together. And when you're heating these up, you want to make sure that you don't hold it like this and go and heat it, because heat rises, you're going to burn your hands. Now this one gets a little bit tricky. Just debating how I want to put these on there. And all these are actually done with, this portion of it is done with molds that we have for our pastry artist class. So that our students, they're learning, but they're not going to get frustrated. You can freeform all these, but it's very difficult to freeform them. So I like to have the molds that they can use for doing the class so that they get the experience in not only molding, but how to assemble without that frustration of it breaking on them. So I'm going to heat these top pieces. Now I'm just going to kind of look on where I want. Like I said, you gotta make sure you line these up exactly where you want them, otherwise you only get one shot. Alright, just like that. So now I'm going to move my sill pad out of the way here. I'm going to bring in my turntable. Hopefully I can do this without knocking anything over. So now I can take and rotate it around for you guys. Now we've got a couple different things that we're going to be using today. So here's our Heron showpiece that I'll be using for you. Now these are done with molds, like I said, and they're silicone molds, and they just kind of look like this. They're real flexible. We take and cook our sugar down, we put it into a pitcher, and then we'll actually take the pitchers and pour our hot molten sugar into the molds, and then we can basically, here's one that I have here, it's a leaf. All you do is you take and turn it out, and that's what it looks like, just like that. So all these pieces that I have here, minus the flowers and the pastillage, are done with what we have for the students with molds. So I didn't want to go too advanced where, you know, I wasn't representing what the students are doing. So now same thing with our, move this over just a little bit just in case I don't want to get too close to that. I also got to remember my hat. So I got my one heron. So I always want to take and stand these up so I don't break these. Grab that guy awkward. Alright, so I'm always going to take and line up everything I have before I really get into gluing them down. So I'm going to do that way. And this stuff is very fragile. It is just basically like working with glass. Here's where I'm going to start using my lamps. And I never want to set my torch up like this. I want to lay it down. I learned the hard way on that. Did that, stood upright, bumped it with my elbow, bang, whole showpiece came down. So now, as I put these on, as you can see, going this way across, I've got a lot of stability. This way, I only have not even a 1/4 inch. There's not a lot of stability. So I cast off these little circles where I can put them on and use them as basically a kickstand. Just a little kind of secret that I use. So I'm going to heat up real lightly, I'm going to heat my base where I want that to go. Now this is where it gets very important to make sure that you have it straight up and down. So I'm going to hold it with one hand, and I'm going to melt the disc I prepared. Glue that right on like that. So now you want to step back, just make sure that everything is straight up and down. If it's leaning just a little bit, I don't know if you can kind of tell, it's a little bit this way, that's fine as long as it's leaning up against this. If it's leaning the other way, there's nothing to support it. So now we're going to do the same thing on this one. We're going to double check where we want it placed. go right in there. So I'll grab another one of my discs here. So this is kind of also where you got to be kind of careful. I don't want to hit too much heat onto this place or this piece. So I'm actually going to turn this a little bit more, just like that. Now as you can see, this way there's a lot of stability, but I can move it real easily the other way. Take that. This guy over here because I'm right-handed. Level him off. Now usually I do in the spring semester go out to high schools around the area and do some sugar demos for them. And normally I end up lighting my gloves on fire a couple times. So I tell them always at the beginning of the demo to kind of keep track how many times I do. I've already burned myself twice on this sculpture, so, but I'm good at hiding it now. Alright, so there's kind of where we're sitting at as far as just the herons showpiece. Now I'm going to take and start doing some embellishments on it. So I've got some, you usually find herons in the grass or wetlands. So I am going to take and add some grass pieces to it. Now the one thing that I want to be careful with is I don't want to get too much heat onto this piece. Otherwise it could start to bend and weep down. I'm going to do it very carefully. And the other thing that I got to be careful for is not hitting the different pieces of the sculpture. And not lighting myself on fire on the lamp on my sleeve. Now, as I put together a sculpture, I usually want to make sure that I'm decorating in a 360-degree field, just so that if someone sees it from behind, it's all encompassed and you don't have to have like a dead spot on the showpiece where there's no movement. Like I said, the more I heat up this base, especially in the back here, the more I got to be careful because it's going to want to just kind of wilt in. So there's kind of where you're seeing in the back. I've got the supports It's supported by the 2 discs that I put in. But you want to make sure that kind of all your glue joints are either clean or hidden. So now I'm going to add some of my flowers here. Start doing some embellishment. So now these are pulled sugar that I made for the sculpture. These are water lilies that I did. So I'm going to add these to it. And then what I did was I actually pulled them and then I put them on these discs so that I can handle them easier than handling just the petals itself. A little bit. And then very, very carefully, because they like to do just that, they like to break. Try to do this without burning myself. And the thinner the sugar is, the more likely it is to break with putting heat to it. So you really want to be careful when you're heating up the showpiece to add these. That was my finger, you couldn't tell. I doubt you can hear it, but there's little kind of clicks and cracks that as I'm heating these different pieces up, like especially the flowers here, putting them on, being that these are actually so thin, the heat hits those petals and it actually is putting hairline cracks into the petals. So you have to be very careful with them when you're heating them up. The other thing you got to kind of watch out for is molten sugar dripping on your hand. So you gotta hold them up just for 30 seconds or so, because like I said, the sugars, you're heating that up to stick them together. So there's kind of our flowers adhered. So now I'm going to stop real quick. I'm going to hit pause. I've got to get some glue melted down, sugar actually, which I use for glue to stick on my pastiche. I'll be right back. Alright, so one thing that I forgot to do is I forgot to put the wings on the heron, so I'm going to do that real quick. Now this is where it's really going to start to get fragile. So you want to be very careful as you're putting these on. If these come down, I mean, it comes down. I mean, I'm hoping it doesn't, but I've had them come down in the past, and there's not really too much you can do other than start over. Take what you got and move on from there. So I think what I might do is I'm going to pause the video and I'm going to get these glued on real quick because I got to hold them into place. So I'll get these glued on and then we'll move on to doing the pastillage. So I'll be right back. Alright, so we got the wings on. So now we're going to take, I got pastillage that's been airbrushed. This is basically a sugar paste. So now we're going to start adding some accentuations to the showpiece. So I'm going to grab some of these smaller pieces. I got a little bit of sugar here that I melted down. I'm just going to use that to stick these on. And this is all about individual taste and artistic expression. How you set these all up on here. You could give the exact same pieces to 5 different people and you're going to come up with 5 different or 15 different ways to do them. It's all just about finding the right piece for the right place. Get the little sugar hair off. Whoop, and then that happens. So, you can cry over it, or we just continue on. Clean off our piece, grab a different pearl, Usually I don't work too much around stuff like this, because that happens. So once we get these pretty well stuck on here, and we're satisfied with what we've got, which I am, once this guy sits up, so there. Now if you want, we can take, and this is totally up to you if you were doing this sugar sculpture, we've got little pieces of what I call coral. It's actually molten sugar that's poured over a bucket of ice. So you pour the sugar from the top down, and then when you pull it out, you get this real nice kind of coral looking. And being that, you know, we're kind of a water theme with the water lilies, these could be like coral. I mean, I know coral's not fresh water, but you could use it as like seaweed, something like that, just to kind of accentuate down on the bottom. Put that in there. And then I do have some small little pieces. And stick kind of up on the side. The thing with these is when you take them out of water, you got to put them onto a cooling rack and then run a fan on them so that the ice melts and it evaporates the water, because the number one enemy of sugar is going to be water, of course, humidity. I might try to find just one more little piece. This guy. Set right back there. And then I have these really cool looking geodes that I made. Now these are pastillage, and you can take and do pastillage, and then you can take like some super grand sugar, just real big sugar crystals, put a little bit of royal icing, and you can color them and do them that way. Or you can take and make saturated sugar, which is how you make rock candy, and put them in a sugar solution and have it that way, and then you have to wait probably about 2 weeks in order for the crystals to grow. But there we have our finished showpiece. I think it looks pretty good. I want to thank you for your time coming and spending with us and learning and seeing how I put these together. I hope that you enjoyed the demo and the information that I gave, and I hope you have a great year, and thank you again for coming.